The sun was setting as Tanya drove through the tree-lined streets of Oak Ridge Heights. Her shoulders ached from hunching over case files all day. After 14 hours tracking money trails through offshore accounts, all she wanted was a hot shower and her comfortable bed. The neighborhood's large homes with perfectly trimmed lawns were a far cry from her modest apartment downtown. But this route shaved 10 minutes off her commute. Tanya noticed the police cruiser the moment it pulled out behind her. She checked her speed, 28 in a 30 zone. Her taillights were working. She'd just had her car serviced last week. Still, that familiar knot formed in her stomach as the blue and red lights flashed in her rearview mirror. She did everything by the book. Signal, pull over safely, turn off the engine, hands at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel. Window rolled halfway down. The routine was sadly familiar. The officer took his time approaching, his flashlight beam sweeping across her back seat before landing directly in her eyes, making her squint. License and registration. His voice was flat, no greeting. Officer Brennan, according to the nameplate on his uniform, looked to be in his mid-30s with a rigid posture that matched his clipped tone. "Good evening." "Officer," Tanya said, keeping her voice steady and polite. "May I ask why I'm being pulled over?" Officer Brennan's flashlight remained pointed at her face. "You rolled through that stop sign back there." Tanya frowned slightly. She was certain she had made a complete stop. "I'm sorry, but I'm sure I stopped completely." "Are you telling me I didn't see what I saw?" The edge in his voice sharpened. "License and registration, now. Of course. My registration is in the glove compartment and my license is in my purse on the passenger seat. I'm going to reach for them now, okay?" The officer didn't respond, just watched her with narrowed eyes as she slowly reached for her purse. "This your car?" he asked suddenly. Tanya paused, hand halfway to her purse. "Yes, it's mine. Seems like a pretty nice ride for—" He didn't finish the sentence, but his meaning hung in the air between them. "I've owned it for 3 years," she replied calmly, though she could feel heat rising to her face. "Where are you coming from? This isn't exactly your neighborhood, is it?" Tanya took a deep breath. "I'm coming from work. I'm taking this route home because of the construction on Main Street." "Work, huh? Where's that?" "Downtown," she answered simply, not wanting to reveal her position at the FBI. In her experience, identifying herself as a federal agent during traffic stops often made things more complicated, not less. Some officers took it as a challenge to their authority. "Downtown doing what exactly?" Officer Brennan pressed, shining the light around her car interior again. "I work in an office. Financial crimes investigation." It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. "Step out of the vehicle, please." Tanya blinked in surprise. "Officer, may I ask why that's necessary?" "I was just on my way home and—" "Step out of the vehicle now." His hand moved to rest on his holster. "Or are you refusing to comply with a lawful order?" Tanya's training kicked in. De-escalate, document mentally, don't make sudden movements. She carefully unbuckled her seatbelt and opened the door, keeping her hands visible at all times. The cool evening air hit her face as she stood beside her car. Nearby, a couple walking their dog slowed to watch. Across the street, a man paused while retrieving his mail. "Place your hands on the hood," Officer Brennan instructed. "Officer, I don't understand why this is necessary. I was only hands on the hood." His voice rose, carrying down the quiet street. More faces appeared in windows and doorways. Tanya placed her palms flat on the warm metal of her car hood. Her work blazer rode up awkwardly. She could feel eyes on her back as neighbors gathered at a distance. "Spread your feet wider." The officer's commands were growing louder than necessary, as if he wanted the growing audience to hear. "Wider." Tanya complied, fighting to maintain her composure as she was forced into an increasingly undignified position. Her cheeks burned not from guilt but humiliation. "We've had reports of burglaries in this area," Officer Brennan announced, loud enough for the onlookers to hear. "People who don't belong here driving around checking out houses." A small circle of spectators had formed at a cautious distance. Some had phones out recording. Tanya kept her eyes fixed on a small dent in her hood, refusing to look at the growing crowd. "I'm going to search your vehicle," the officer stated, not asking for permission. "Officer, I do not consent to a search," Tanya said firmly. "I was allegedly pulled over for rolling through a stop sign. That doesn't give grounds for a vehicle search. You seem awfully nervous about me looking in your car. Something to hide?" His voice carried theatrical suspicion. He keyed his radio. Dispatch, send another unit to my location. Possible 10 to 31. Tanya recognized the code for crime in progress. The exaggeration was staggering. Officer, this is completely unnecessary, she said, struggling to keep frustration from her voice. I'm a professional woman driving home from work. There's no crime occurring here. A professional woman, huh? He made air quotes with his fingers, visible to the onlookers. And what kind of professional are you exactly? Because this car cost more than I make in a year. A flush of anger warmed Tanya's neck. I earned everything I have. Sure you did, he scoffed, loud enough for several neighbors to hear. Someone whispered something and a few uncomfortable laughs followed. Officer Brennan began circling her car, peering through windows with his flashlight. Nice leather seats, designer purse, expensive watch, all on an office worker's salary? The insinuation was clear, and from the murmurs in the small crowd they caught it too. Tanya bit the inside of her cheek hard, tasting metal. 10 years with the Bureau, 3 commendations for excellence, and here she was, being treated like a criminal based on nothing but prejudice. Another police car pulled up, lights flashing. A female officer stepped out and approached. What's the situation? Just checking out something suspicious, Officer Brennan replied, gesturing toward Tanya. She claims she works downtown but can't give a straight answer about what she does. Driving through this neighborhood, taking a shortcut. Again with the air quotes. The second officer looked at Tanya, then back at Officer Brennan, hesitation visible on her face. Was there a traffic violation? Rolled through a stop sign, Brennan said. But she's acting nervous, gave vague answers. Thought it was worth looking into with the break-ins recently. Tanya remained silent, calculating her options. Making a scene would only escalate the situation. Filing a complaint later would be more effective. But every second she stood there, hands splayed on her car hood like a common criminal, chipped away at something essential inside her. Officer, she finally said, addressing the female officer, I have identification in my purse that will clarify everything. May I please retrieve it? The female officer looked to Brennan, who shrugged. Go ahead, but move slowly. With as much dignity as she could muster, Tanya straightened up and walked to the passenger side. She was acutely aware of phone cameras following her movements. Her purse sat on the seat where she'd left it. Inside was not only her driver's license but her FBI credentials. She considered her next move carefully. Revealing her identity would end this humiliation quickly. But something made her hesitate. This wasn't just about her. How many others had faced this same treatment without the shield of a federal badge to protect them? As her hand hovered over her purse, Tanya made a decision. This moment, uncomfortable and unfair as it was, needed to be documented exactly as it would play out for any other person who looked like her. Actually, she said, turning to face both officers, I'd like to know specifically what legal reason you have to search my vehicle or detain me further. Unless you're placing me under arrest, I believe I'm free to go. Officer Brennan's face hardened. You don't get to decide how this goes. Actually, the law does, Tanya replied evenly. And the law says you need probable cause for a search, not just a hunch based on how I look or what I drive. The crowd had grown larger. More phones were recording. The female officer shifted uncomfortably. Get back against the car, Officer Brennan ordered, his voice rising again. And there it was, the moment where compliance and dignity diverged. With a deep breath, Tanya prepared herself for what would come next, knowing this encounter was far from over. Tanya stood her ground, even as Officer Brennan stepped closer, using his height to tower over her. The evening had grown darker, the police lights painting the neighborhood in alternating blue and red. The crowd of onlookers had doubled, their whispers creating a hum of background noise. I said, "Get back against the car," Officer Brennan repeated, his hand again resting on his holster in what felt like a deliberate threat. The female officer, Officer Chen according to her nameplate, stepped forward. Maybe we should, I've got this under control, Brennan cut her off without looking away from Tanya. Ma'am, this is your final warning. Tanya weighed her options quickly. Her FBI training had prepared her for tense standoffs, but usually she was the one with the badge out. The irony wasn't lost on her. With a measured breath, she turned and placed her hands back on the hood of her car. This wasn't the time for a stand. Not yet. Dispatch, run plate number 279XDL. Brennan spoke into his shoulder radio. And get me another unit out here. Another unit? Officer Chen questioned quietly. Is that really? We don't know who we're dealing with, Brennan replied loudly, making sure both Tanya and the growing audience could hear. Better safe than sorry. A middle-aged couple had stopped their evening walk to watch. The man whispered something to the woman, who shook her head disapprovingly. A teenager on a bike circled slowly at the edge of the scene, his phone held high to capture everything. Across the street, a family stood on their porch, children peeking out from behind their parents' legs. I have a right to know why I'm being detained, Tanya said firmly. You're being detained because I say so, Brennan replied, and your attitude is making me think you might be hiding something serious. His radio crackled. Plate comes back clean. Registered to Tanya Richards, no wants, no warrants. Run the name, Brennan ordered into his radio. To Tanya, he said. So your name is Tanya Richards? Is that correct? Yes, she answered simply. What are you doing in this neighborhood, Ms. Richards? As I already told you, I'm driving home from work. And where exactly do you work again? His tone suggested he hadn't believed her the first time. I work downtown, in an office building. She kept her answers short, knowing anything she said could be twisted. And what is it you do at this office building? The sarcasm in his voice was unmistakable. I investigate financial crimes. Again, not a lie, but not revealing her position. Officer Brennan laughed. Financial crimes? Like what, bouncing checks? Several onlookers chuckled, and Tanya felt her face grow warm again. The humiliation was calculated, she realized. He was performing for the audience. Look, everyone. Brennan called out to the crowd, gesturing toward Tanya. We've got ourselves a big-shot detective here. More laughter rippled through the gathering. Tanya kept her eyes fixed on the hood of her car, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her reaction. A third police car pulled up, lights flashing but no siren. Two more officers stepped out and approached. One was older with gray at his temples, Lieutenant Perry according to his uniform. The other was younger, Officer Wilson. The presence of a lieutenant at a routine traffic stop was unusual, and Tanya wondered if someone in the crowd had called the station. What's the situation here, Brennan? Lieutenant Perry asked, surveying the scene with obvious concern. Possible suspicious activity, sir. Subject was driving through the neighborhood slowly, failed to stop at a sign, gave vague answers about what she was doing here. Lieutenant Perry turned to Tanya. Ma'am, are you aware? I've been trying to explain to your officer, Tanya interrupted calmly, that I was simply driving home from work using an alternate route due to construction. I've been detained for nearly 20 minutes now without clear cause. The lieutenant glanced at the gathered crowd, clearly noting the many recording phones. Brennan, can I speak with you for a moment? The two stepped away, speaking in hushed tones. Officer Chen approached Tanya. You can stand up straight, she said quietly. There's no need to keep leaning on the car. Tanya straightened, rolling her shoulders to ease the tension that had built there. Thank you, she said, keeping her voice low. This is completely unnecessary, you know. Officer Chen's eyes darted to her colleagues, then back to Tanya. Just following procedure, she said, but her expression suggested she knew something wasn't right about the situation. Lieutenant Perry and Officer Brennan returned. The lieutenant's face was stern. Ms. Richards, Officer Brennan informs me that he has reason to believe you may be connected to a string of recent burglaries in this area. Tanya's eyebrows shot up. That's absurd. Based on what evidence? Ma'am, there's been a pattern of individuals who don't reside in this neighborhood conducting surveillance before the break-ins. The lieutenant continued. I wasn't conducting surveillance. I was driving home, Tanya replied, her patience wearing thin. And what exactly does individuals who don't reside in this neighborhood mean? The implication hung heavy in the air. Several onlookers shifted uncomfortably. Even Lieutenant Perry had the decency to look slightly embarrassed. Just a precaution, he said. We'd like to search your vehicle. If you have nothing to hide. With all due respect, Lieutenant, Tanya cut in, I do not consent to a search of my vehicle. There is no probable cause, and I am fully aware of my rights. Officer Brennan stepped closer. See that right there is suspicious behavior. Innocent people don't refuse vehicle searches. Actually, Tanya replied evenly, innocent people with knowledge of their constitutional rights often refuse unwarranted searches. A few murmurs of approval came from the crowd. Someone clapped briefly before going silent. Brennan's face flushed red. Lieutenant, I'm going to request a K-9 unit. A drug-sniffing dog? Tanya couldn't hold back her disbelief. For someone who allegedly rolled through a stop sign? The absurdity of the situation might have been comical if it weren't so infuriating. Several bystanders were shaking their heads now, clearly seeing the overreach for what it was. "Officer Brennan," Lieutenant Perry said, a note of caution in his voice. "I don't think that's necessary at this time." "With all respect." "Sir," Brennan insisted. "Better safe than sorry." While they argued, Tanya noticed a news van pull up at the end of the block. Someone in the crowd must have called the local station. This was escalating beyond anything she had anticipated when she left work that evening. "This is ridiculous," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I'm a professional woman being treated like a criminal for driving down a public street. Would we be having this conversation if I looked different?" A hush fell over the crowd. Officer Chen looked at the ground. Lieutenant Perry's expression tightened. "Ma'am, no one is making this about—" the lieutenant began. "Aren't they?" Tanya challenged. "Your officer pulled me over for allegedly rolling through a stop sign. Now I'm surrounded by 3 police cars with lights flashing, being discussed as a burglary suspect and threatened with a K-9 unit, all while an audience watches me being humiliated. Please explain how this is standard procedure." A reporter was making her way toward the scene, cameraman in tow. Lieutenant Perry noticed them and turned to Officer Brennan with a look that clearly said, "Fix this now." "Ms. Richards," Brennan said, his tone suddenly professional, "if you could just answer a few more questions, we can resolve this quickly." "I've answered all your questions," Tanya replied, multiple times. "Either charge me with something or let me go." The reporter was now close enough to hear. "Excuse me," she called out. "I'm Lisa Wong from Channel 7 News. Can someone tell me what's happening here?" Lieutenant Perry stepped forward, intercepting her before she could get closer. "Just a routine traffic stop, nothing newsworthy." "Doesn't look routine to me," the reporter observed. Noting the multiple police cars and gathered crowd, Officer Brennan leaned in close to Tanya. "Listen," he said, his voice a harsh whisper. "You're making things difficult for everyone here. Just let us search your car, and if everything checks out, you can be on your way. No ticket, no problem." "No," Tanya said firmly. "I will not consent to an illegal search." "Then I'll have to detain you while we get a warrant," he threatened. "On what grounds?" Tanya challenged. Brennan's jaw tightened. "I don't like your attitude." "My attitude is not a crime," Tanya replied. "And we both know you won't get a warrant because you have no probable cause." The standoff continued, with Tanya aware that every passing minute drew more attention. The news crew was interviewing people in the crowd. Her simple drive home had turned into a public spectacle, and the weight of the humiliation pressed down on her shoulders like a physical burden. But beneath the embarrassment burned a steady flame of resolve. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every person who had ever been in this position, without the knowledge or resources to stand up for themselves. Sometimes, Tanya reflected, the most important battles found you when you least expected them. The news crew's presence changed the dynamic instantly. Lieutenant Perry stepped away from Tanya, plastering on a professional smile as he approached the reporter. Officer Chen shifted uncomfortably, glancing between Tanya and the growing media spectacle. Only Officer Brennan seemed unmoved, his stance rigid and eyes cold as he continued to stand too close to Tanya. "This is getting out of hand, Officer Wilson." The youngest cop on scene muttered to no one in particular. The evening had fully settled now, the scene lit by harsh police lights and the camera crew's portable spotlights. Neighbors who had initially watched from their porches had ventured closer, drawn by the unusual commotion in their quiet community. A few had started talking to the reporter, gesturing toward the police cars and Tanya. "Last chance," Brennan said under his breath so only Tanya could hear. "Cooperate now, or this gets worse for you." Tanya met his gaze steadily. "I've been cooperative. I've answered your questions. I've provided my name. I've remained calm despite being publicly humiliated for no legitimate reason. What I haven't done and won't do is surrender my rights." "You people always make everything so difficult," he said, the words barely audible but crystal clear in their meaning. The statement hung in the air between them. Tanya felt something inside her shift. She'd been patient, strategic, calculating the best way to handle this situation, but that comment crossed a line that demanded response. "My purse is still in the passenger seat," she said calmly. "I'd like to retrieve my identification now." Brennan smirked. "Finally seeing reason?" "Something like that," he nodded sharply. Hands where I can see them. Move slowly. Tanya walked to the passenger side door, aware of the camera now tracking her movement. The reporter had noticed her actions and was moving closer, microphone extended. "Ma'am," the reporter called.
Can you tell us what's happening here?
"Not now, please," Tanya replied without looking away from her task. She opened the door carefully and reached for her purse. A simple black leather bag that had been a gift from her parents when she graduated from Quantico. The thought of them watching this scene play out on their local news made her stomach tighten, but she pushed the feeling aside. Brennan hovered close, watching her every move. "Just the ID," he warned. Tanya unzipped her purse and removed her wallet. She opened it slowly, pushed past her driver's license and pulled out a leather credential case. Without a word, she flipped it open and held it up for Officer Brennan to see. The gold FBI badge caught the police lights, flashing blue and red. Beside it, her photo ID card clearly identified her as Special Agent Tanya Richards, Federal Bureau of Investigation. For several heartbeats, Brennan simply stared. His face, previously flushed with authority and anger, drained of color. His mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. "Is there a problem, officer?" Tanya asked, her voice steady. Officer Chen stepped closer, peering at the credentials. Her eyes widened. "Oh," was all she managed to say. Lieutenant Perry, noticing the sudden shift in his officer's demeanor, excused himself from the reporter and walked back toward them. "What's happening here?" Tanya turned her credentials toward him. "Special Agent Tanya Richards, FBI. I've been trying to get home after a 14-hour day investigating a money laundering operation when I was stopped. Detained and publicly humiliated by your officer." The lieutenant's expression cycled rapidly through surprise, understanding, and dismay. "Agent Richards, don't apologize yet," Tanya cut him off. "First, I'd like to know why Officer Brennan felt it necessary to escalate a routine traffic stop into this circus." She gestured to the police cars, the news crew, and the gathered crowd. Brennan had found his voice. "You should have identified yourself immediately." "Why?" Tanya challenged. "Would you have treated me differently if you knew I was federal law enforcement? Because that's exactly the problem, isn't it? No citizen should be treated this way, badge or no badge." The reporter had inched closer during this exchange, her cameraman adjusting focus to capture Tanya's FBI credentials still visible in her hand. "You're with the FBI?" the reporter asked, excitement evident in her voice. Tanya turned toward the camera, decision made. This moment had ceased to be just about her personal humiliation. It had become something larger, something that needed to be seen. "Yes, I am," she confirmed. "And I was just subjected to what appears to be a textbook case of racial profiling by Officer Brennan." "That's not true," Brennan protested loudly. "This had nothing to do with—" "You pulled me over claiming I rolled through a stop sign," Tanya interrupted. "When I questioned this, you immediately escalated the situation. You made comments about my car being too nice for someone like me. You called for backup for a simple traffic violation. You attempted to search my vehicle without probable cause. And you told bystanders I might be connected to burglaries with zero evidence." The reporter was scribbling notes furiously. "Lieutenant, is this how your officers typically conduct traffic stops?" she asked, turning to Perry. The lieutenant raised his hands defensively. "This is clearly a misunderstanding. If Agent Richards had simply identified herself at the beginning, why should I have to?" Tanya pressed. "Does every black woman driving through this neighborhood need an FBI badge to be treated with basic dignity and respect?" A murmur ran through the crowd. Several people nodded in agreement. The cameraman zoomed in on Brennan's face, which had grown red again, this time with embarrassment rather than anger. Officer Chen stepped forward. "Lieutenant, I think we should discuss this back at the station." "Excellent idea," Tanya agreed. "I have a full report to file." "Now wait a minute," Brennan tried again. "You were being evasive about your job and purpose in the neighborhood. That raised legitimate suspicions." "I told you I was driving home from work," Tanya countered. "I told you I investigate financial crimes." Both true statements. "I wasn't required to disclose my federal status during a traffic stop, and you know that." Lieutenant Perry, clearly trying to regain control of the rapidly deteriorating situation, turned to the crowd. "Folks, there's nothing more to see here. Please return to your homes." Nobody moved. If anything, more people had gathered, drawn by the lights and commotion. Agent Richards, Perry said, lowering his voice. Perhaps we can discuss this privately? I think we're well past privacy, Lieutenant. Tanya gestured to the news crew and the dozens of cell phones recording the encounter. This became public the moment your officer decided to make a spectacle of me. A middle-aged woman pushed forward from the crowd. I've lived in this neighborhood for 20 years, she announced. And I've seen this happen before. Different officers, different people, same story. Ma'am, please step back, Officer Wilson requested, but his heart wasn't in it. No, let her speak, Tanya said. This affects the whole community. The woman nodded gratefully. 2 months ago, my nephew came to visit me. He was stopped 3 times in one weekend just for walking around the block. Each time they asked what he was doing here. Whose house he was visiting made him prove he knew me. Others began to speak up. They followed my husband home from the grocery store last month. My son gets pulled over at least once a week driving to his night classes. I had to start wearing my hospital ID visibly when I walk my dog. Officer Brennan backed up slowly, as if trying to physically distance himself from the stories being shared. Lieutenant Perry's professional demeanor was cracking under the weight of the public testimony. The reporter was capturing it all, moving her microphone from person to person as the community's collective experiences poured forth, unleashed by Tanya's stand. Tanya watched silently, her FBI credentials still in hand. This had become something far beyond a traffic stop or personal indignity. It had opened a floodgate of shared experiences that had been waiting for just such a catalyst. Officer Chen approached her quietly. I'm sorry this happened to you, she said, her voice barely audible over the crowd. It's not just about me, Tanya replied. The young officer nodded, understanding. Lieutenant Perry finally managed to regain some authority. Everyone, please. We hear your concerns. I promise they will be addressed through proper channels. For now, we need to clear this area. Turning to Tanya, he said, Agent Richards, you're free to go, of course. No citation will be issued. If you'd like to file a formal complaint, you can come to the station tomorrow. Tanya shook her head. I'm coming now. This needs to be documented immediately while the details are fresh. I'll drive you, Officer Chen offered suddenly. Brennan's head snapped toward her. What? I'll drive Agent Richards to the station to file her report, Chen repeated firmly. Her vehicle can remain here until we return. Before Brennan could protest, Lieutenant Perry nodded. Good idea, Officer Chen. Take Agent Richards to the station. Brennan, Wilson, help disperse this crowd and then report back to the station immediately. The look on Brennan's face was one Tanya would remember for a long time, a mixture of shock, anger, and the dawning realization that his actions would have consequences. As Officer Chen led her toward a patrol car, the reporter caught up with them. Agent Richards, will you be pursuing legal action against the department? Tanya paused, looking back at Officer Brennan standing alone under the harsh lights surrounded by the community he'd sworn to protect and serve. I'll be pursuing justice, she answered simply, whatever form that needs to take. The police station buzzed with unusual energy when Officer Chen escorted Tanya through the doors. Dispatch calls and routine paperwork paused as officers looked up, conversations dying mid-sentence. News traveled fast in law enforcement circles, and word of an FBI agent being profiled had clearly beaten them there. The police chief, a stocky man with salt and pepper hair named Chief Thomas, waited in the lobby. His face was a careful mask of professional concern. Agent Richards, he said, extending his hand. I want to personally apologize for any misunderstanding that occurred tonight. Tanya shook his hand firmly. Misunderstanding isn't the word I would use, Chief Thomas. He nodded, lips pressed into a thin line. Let's talk in my office. As they walked through the bullpen, Tanya felt eyes following her. Some curious, some concerned, some hostile. Officer Chen remained by her side, a silent ally in a space that suddenly felt adversarial. The chief's office was modest but tidy, with a wall of commendations and photos of him shaking hands with various city officials. He closed the door behind them and gestured for Tanya to sit. Officer Chen, thank you. You can return to your duties, he said. Chen hesitated, glancing at Tanya. Actually, Tanya said, I'd like Officer Chen to stay. She was a witness to the entire encounter. The chief frowned slightly but nodded. Very well. For the next hour, Tanya methodically recounted the evening's events, her voice steady and professional. She cited specific comments, actions, and policies that had been violated. Officer Chen occasionally confirmed details or added her observations. The chief took notes, his expression growing more troubled with each passing minute. "This is deeply concerning," he said finally. "I assure you, Agent Richards, we take these allegations very seriously." "They aren't allegations, Chief Thomas. They're documented facts." The entire incident was recorded by multiple bystanders and a news crew. As if on cue, the chief's phone rang. He answered it, listened briefly, and his face fell. "I see. Thank you for letting me know." Hanging up, he looked at Tanya with new gravity. "The incident is already on social media. Channel 7 ran a teaser for their late news." Tanya wasn't surprised. The truth has a way of getting out. "Agent Richards, I hope you understand the position this puts us in." "I understand perfectly. The question is whether you do." Tanya leaned forward. "This isn't just about me or Officer Brennan. This is about a pattern that your community members were brave enough to speak about tonight. People who have been afraid to come forward until now." The chief sighed heavily. "What are you looking for here?" "Officer Brennan will be disciplined, of course." "I'm looking for accountability and change," Tanya interrupted. "Not just a slap on the wrist and business as usual. Your department has a systemic problem that needs addressing. That's a serious accusation." "It's a serious problem." Tanya slid a business card across the desk. "I'm leading an FBI task force on civil rights violations in law enforcement. What happened tonight falls precisely within our mandate." The chief stared at the card as if it might bite him. "You're investigating us?" "I wasn't," Tanya replied honestly. "But I am now." By morning, the video had gone viral. Tanya woke to 17 missed calls and dozens of text messages from colleagues, friends, and family. Her parents had left 3 increasingly worried voicemails after seeing her on their local news. She called them first. "Mom, I'm fine. We saw everything, honey," her mother said, voice tight with emotion. "That officer had no right." "I know, Mom. That's why I'm doing something about it. Your father hasn't slept. He wanted to drive up there last night." Tanya smiled despite herself. Her father had always been protective, even after she'd become an armed federal agent. "Tell Dad I've got this handled." After reassuring her parents, Tanya showered and dressed for work. She chose her most professional suit and styled her hair carefully. Today would be about perception as much as substance. Her phone rang as she was making coffee. It was her supervisor, Assistant Director Powell. "Richards," she answered. "I just got a call from the mayor of Oak Ridge Heights," Powell said without preamble. "Care to tell me why my lead financial crimes investigator is suddenly the face of a police racism scandal?" Tanya took a deep breath. "It's not something I planned, sir." "I assumed not." His voice softened slightly. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine." "Good, the mayor is in damage control mode. The police chief is claiming it was an isolated incident with one problem officer." Tanya stirred her coffee. "It wasn't. The community members who spoke up made that clear." "I believe you. But this complicates things for your money laundering case. You're now a very public figure in that jurisdiction." She hadn't considered that angle. The investigation she'd been working on for months involved several prominent local businesses. "I understand. Take the day. The media will be looking for you. We'll discuss next steps this afternoon." When she arrived at the FBI field office later that morning, Tanya was greeted with a mix of supportive comments and curious stares. Her colleague Dev met her at the elevator. "You're all over Twitter," he said. "500,000 views and climbing. People are calling you a hero." "I'm not a hero," Tanya replied, uncomfortable with the characterization. "I just stood up for myself." Which is exactly what a lot of people wish they could do but can't. Dev walked with her to her office. "The brass is in a weird position. They're proud of you standing up to injustice but nervous about the publicity." "Tell me about it," Tanya sighed. Inside her office, she found a small crowd of colleagues waiting. They offered support, shared similar experiences, and asked questions about what would happen next. Tanya appreciated their solidarity, but was relieved when Assistant Director Powell called the impromptu gathering to an end. "Richards, my office," he said from the doorway. Powell's corner office had a view of downtown and the river beyond. He closed the door and motioned for her to sit. "The police department has placed Officer Brennan on administrative leave pending investigation," he informed her. "The chief has requested that we delay any federal inquiry until their internal affairs process is complete." Tanya frowned. "That's not acceptable. Internal affairs investigations can drag on for months and often lead nowhere. I agree. Powell surprised her. Which is why I told him our investigation will proceed regardless. Your task force has jurisdiction here. Relief flooded through her. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet. This puts you in a difficult position. You're now both an investigator and a complainant. Some will question your objectivity. I can handle that. Powell studied her. I know you can. But there's something else to consider. This incident has created an opportunity. What kind of opportunity? For real change. He turned his computer monitor toward her. On the screen was a video of last night's encounter. The view count now over 1 million. People are listening in a way they rarely do. You have leverage. The question is how to use it most effectively. Tanya considered his words. What are you suggesting? That's up to you. But whatever you decide, the Bureau will support you. Powell leaned forward. Some of your colleagues think you should press for Brennan's termination. Make an example of him. Tanya had been thinking about this all night. Firing one officer doesn't fix a broken system. No, it doesn't, Powell agreed. So what would? Before she could answer, his phone buzzed. The police chief is here to see you, his assistant announced over the intercom. Powell raised his eyebrows. Send him in. Chief Thomas entered, looking like he hadn't slept. He nodded to Powell but focused on Tanya. Agent Richards, I've spent the morning reviewing body cam footage and speaking with witnesses. His voice was heavy. I want to officially apologize on behalf of the department. Officer Brennan's actions were unacceptable and do not represent our values. Actions speak louder than words, Chief, Tanya replied. I agree, which is why I'm here. He handed her a folder. This is our proposed disciplinary action and department-wide reform plan. I'd like your input before we finalize it. Tanya opened the folder, skeptical but curious. Inside was a comprehensive proposal. Implicit bias training, community oversight committee, revised stop procedures, body camera policy enhancements, and more. It wasn't perfect, but it was substantial. This is a start, she acknowledged. There's one more thing. Chief Thomas seemed to struggle with his next words. We're establishing a joint task force with community leaders to review and revise our policies. We'd like you to be part of it. Powell and Tanya exchanged glances. Why me? She asked. Because you did something rare last night, the chief replied. You held us accountable without seeking revenge. You spoke about justice, not punishment. We need that perspective. As Tanya considered his request, her phone lit up with a news alert. The video had reached 5 million views. Hashtags were trending. People were sharing their own stories of similar encounters. What had begun as a humiliating traffic stop had sparked a conversation that was spreading far beyond Oak Ridge Heights. The question now was where to direct all that energy and attention. What about Officer Brennan? She asked. He's on leave pending the investigation's outcome, Chief Thomas replied. Tanya closed the folder. I want him as part of this task force too. Both men stared at her in surprise. Excuse me? The chief said. You heard me. If this is really about change, not just damage control, then Officer Brennan needs to be part of the process. He needs to hear these stories firsthand, to understand the impact of his actions and attitudes. The chief looked dumbfounded. I'm not sure it's either all of us working toward solutions, Tanya said firmly, or none of us. Real change doesn't come from punishment alone. It comes from understanding and accountability. Powell leaned back in his chair, a small smile playing at the corner of his mouth. I think Agent Richards just outlined her terms, Chief Thomas. The chief looked between them, clearly recalculating his approach. I'll need to discuss this with the mayor and the union. Do that, Tanya said, standing up. In the meantime, I'll be reviewing every complaint filed against your department for the last 5 years. Consider it research for our task force. As the chief left, visibly shaken, Powell chuckled. Not exactly what he expected when he came offering olive branches. I'm not interested in easy solutions or quick fixes, Tanya replied. If we're going to do this, let's do it right. She gazed out the window at the city below, thinking of all the people who had stepped forward last night to share their stories. She owed them more than a simple disciplinary action against one officer. She owed them real, lasting change. And sometimes change began in the most unexpected ways. 6 weeks had passed since the night that changed everything. The community center room buzzed with conversation as people settled into their chairs. At the front, a table with microphones faced the audience of about 70 people. community members, police officers, local officials, and media representatives. Tanya straightened her notes, glancing at her watch. The first meeting of the Oak Ridge Heights Joint Community Police Task Force was about to begin, and one chair remained empty. Officer Brennan's. He's not coming, Officer Chen whispered. Taking the seat beside her, Tanya frowned. The chief assured me. The door at the back of the room opened. Officer Brennan walked in, still in uniform but without his usual confidence. His eyes scanned the room, landing briefly on Tanya before dropping to the floor. He made his way to the front and reluctantly took the empty seat at the end of the table. Chief Thomas stood and approached the microphone. Thank you all for being here tonight. 6 weeks ago, an incident occurred that forced us to confront some uncomfortable truths about our department and our community. Rather than sweeping these issues under the rug, we've chosen to address them head-on. He gestured to the diverse panel seated at the table. This task force brings together police officers, community leaders, civil rights experts, and concerned citizens. Together, we'll review policies, listen to experiences, and implement real changes to ensure fair and equal treatment for everyone in Oak Ridge Heights. The chief introduced each panel member. When he came to Tanya, there was a smattering of applause and a few phone cameras raised to capture her image. And finally, Officer Michael Brennan, who has voluntarily joined our task force as part of his commitment to learning and growth. The room fell silent. Brennan shifted uncomfortably in his seat, eyes still downcast. A few people in the audience whispered to each other. Now I'll turn things over to our chairperson, FBI Special Agent Tanya Richards. Tanya approached the microphone, feeling the weight of expectation. Thank you, Chief. I want to start by acknowledging something important. I didn't ask to be here. None of us did. Circumstances brought us together, but choice will keep us here. She looked out at the faces watching her. This isn't about one incident or one officer. This is about systems, patterns, and cultures that need to change. But change isn't about pointing fingers or assigning blame. It's about honest conversation and commitment to do better. For the next hour, community members shared experiences. An older man described being followed around stores. A teenage boy talked about being stopped while riding his bike. A young mother explained why she taught her children to be extra polite around police. Throughout the testimonies, Tanya watched Brennan. At first, he sat rigidly, jaw tight, eyes forward. But as the stories continued, something shifted. He began to listen, really listen, perhaps for the first time. When the formal portion ended, people broke into small discussion groups. Tanya noticed Brennan sitting alone, everyone giving him a wide berth. She made her way over and took the seat beside him. Thanks for coming, she said simply. He looked up, surprise evident on his face. Didn't have much choice. We always have choices. Brennan shook his head. Not me, not anymore. My career is over. I'm the poster boy for bad policing. People cross the street when they see me coming. And how does that feel? Tanya asked. How do you think it feels? He snapped, then immediately seemed to regret his tone. Sorry, that's part of my problem, isn't it? Tanya nodded. Self-awareness is a start. Why did you want me here? He asked suddenly. You could have pushed for my badge. Everyone expected it. Hell, I expected it. Firing you would have been easy, Tanya replied honestly, but it wouldn't fix anything. The next officer, Brennan, would just take your place. He flinched at her words but didn't argue. The hard path is change, she continued. Real, lasting change in you, in the department, in the community. That's what I'm interested in. Before he could respond, a woman approached their table. Tanya recognized her as one of the people who had spoken up the night of the incident. Officer, the woman said quietly to Brennan, I just wanted to say, thank you for being here. It couldn't have been easy to show up. Brennan looked startled. Thank you, ma'am. As the woman walked away, something subtle shifted in Brennan's expression, a crack in the defensive wall he'd built around himself. Over the following months, the task force met regularly. They reviewed stop-and-search policies, complaint procedures, and training protocols. Community members conducted ride-alongs with officers. Police participated in neighborhood events outside their patrol cars. Brennan rarely spoke during the early meetings, but he always showed up. Gradually, his posture changed. He began to ask questions. He volunteered to review body camera footage with community members, explaining police procedures while listening to their perspectives on how the interactions felt from the other side. 3 months in, he approached Tanya after a particularly difficult meeting about a use of force incident in a neighboring city. "I've been thinking," he said, hands fidgeting with his coffee cup, "about that night. About what I said to you." Tanya waited, giving him space to continue. "I told myself I was just doing my job, following procedure, but that wasn't true." He met her eyes for the first time. "I saw you driving through that neighborhood and I made assumptions. I decided who you were before you said a single word. And now," Tanya prompted, "now I'm trying to understand why, where that comes from." He shook his head. "It's not easy to look at yourself and not like what you see. Growth rarely is." A week later, Brennan didn't show up for the task force meeting. Tanya called him afterward, concerned. "I was at the academy," he explained. "I've been talking with the training director about revising the implicit bias curriculum. We're developing something new based on what I've learned from the task force." Tanya was surprised. "That's impressive initiative. Don't sound so shocked," he said, a hint of humor in his voice for the first time. "Even dinosaurs can evolve." 6 months after the incident, Tanya's phone rang early on a Saturday morning. It was Chief Thomas. "Agent Richards, have you seen the news?" She hadn't. The video of her encounter with Brennan had resurfaced, but with a twist. A local filmmaker had created a follow-up documentary about the task force's work and the changes implemented in Oak Ridge Heights. It included interviews with community members, officers, and Brennan himself speaking candidly about his mistakes and what he'd learned. The documentary was going viral, but for entirely different reasons than the original video. "There's more," the chief continued. "The Police Chiefs Association has invited you and Brennan to speak at their annual conference next month. They want to hear about our program." The conference room was packed with police leadership from across the country. Tanya stood at the podium, Brennan beside her, both of them slightly uncomfortable with the attention. 6 months ago, a traffic stop went wrong in just about every way possible. Tanya began. "I was humiliated. Officer Brennan was exposed. Our community was divided. It could have ended there, with anger, punishment, and nothing really changing." She gestured to Brennan, passing him the microphone. He cleared his throat nervously. "I was a good officer who did a bad thing, or at least that's what I told myself at first. The truth was harder to face, that I wasn't seeing people clearly. I was seeing threats, stereotypes, and assumptions instead of individuals." He looked out at his fellow officers. "We're given enormous power and responsibility. When we abuse that power, even unintentionally, we break something precious: trust. Rebuilding it is much harder than maintaining it." For the next hour, they presented the task force's work, the revised training programs, the community engagement initiatives, the accountability measures, the simple but powerful act of listening to those they served. Afterward, officers from departments across the country lined up to speak with them, asking questions, taking notes, requesting resources. As the crowd thinned, Tanya found herself standing alone with Brennan. "Did you ever think we'd end up here?" he asked. "Working together?" "No," she admitted. "But I hoped for something like this. Real change takes unlikely partnerships sometimes." "I still have a lot to learn," he said. "We all do." Tanya offered her hand. "That's the point." Brennan shook it firmly, the gesture simple but significant, a bridge between their worlds. Later, as Tanya packed up her presentation materials, her phone buzzed with a news alert. Another video was going viral. A black teenager detained by police in a different state. Another officer making assumptions. Another moment that could divide or unite. The work was far from over. But in Oak Ridge Heights, something had shifted. A traffic stop that could have been just another statistic, just another outrage soon forgotten, had instead become a catalyst for genuine transformation. As she walked out of the conference center, Tanya thought about power, not the power of her badge or gun, but the power of persistence, the power of turning humiliation into purpose, the power of demanding better from those entrusted to protect and serve, and perhaps most importantly, the power of seeing the humanity in others, even when, especially when, it was hardest to find.